Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.Boocast. Tonight's video has 3 true-to-life horror stories. Slow burns, unsettling details, and that kind of dread that sticks with you after the screen goes dark. No monsters jumping out, no cheap tricks, just experiences that feel too real, and moments where something quietly goes wrong. So get comfortable, keep the lights on if you need to, and let's start with the first story. I'll never sleep in someone else's house. Again. Introduction. I can still smell the shampoo in the guest bathroom at Lena's house. Something sharp and herbal, like crushed rosemary and clean water, because that was the first thing that made me feel out of place. It wasn't my bathroom. It wasn't my sink. The mirror had a faint toothpaste constellation in the corner that wasn't mine, and when I leaned closer, I could see a hair caught in the frame, pale and curled, stuck there as if it had been waiting. I was 15, old enough to pretend I wasn't nervous about spending the night somewhere else, but young enough that my body still reacted in honest, embarrassing ways. My stomach had the hollow, fluttering ache of anticipation, and my hands stayed damp no matter how many times I wiped them against my jeans. I told myself it was just because of the backpack straps digging into my palms, the late afternoon heat, the way Lena's dog had jumped on me the second I stepped through the front door. The sleepover wasn't supposed to be a big deal. It was the first weekend after finals, the small breath of summer before everything changed shape. Lena's mom had agreed to let 4 of us stay over. Me, Lena, her neighbor Nora, and a girl from our literature class named Haley, who I'd only talked to twice. It sounded normal. It was normal. Pizza, movies, stupid dares maybe. The kind of night that would blur into the general archive of adolescence. Lena's house itself was ordinary in the way a lot of older houses are ordinary. Sturdy, warm-colored brick, a little porch with chipped paint on the railing, and windows that were too narrow and too tall. The living room smelled like laundry detergent and the wax Lena's mom used on the wood floors. There were family photos everywhere, framed in uneven clusters, faces frozen in sunlit parks and birthday candles. A piano no one played sat against the far wall, its keys covered by a beige cloth like a shroud. Lena led me upstairs to her room, talking too fast, everything in her voice pitched slightly higher than usual. She was excited, I thought, or maybe she was performing excitement the way people do when they're trying to prove something is easy. Her room was at the end of the hall. The hallway itself was narrow, and the carpet had a flattened path down the center from years of feet. There was a faint smell, dust and something metallic like old coins, that got stronger the closer we walked toward her door. Her bedroom had posters above the bed and a standing fan in the corner, the cheap kind that rattled even on the lowest setting. Clothes were piled on a chair. A phone charger snaked across the floor. Nothing about it suggested anything strange. Yet the moment I stepped inside, the skin at the base of my neck tightened, and I had that sensation you get when you enter a room where someone has been arguing, like the air still held the imprint of a feeling. "Sorry it's messy," Lena said, but her eyes didn't look at the mess. They kept flicking toward the closet. The closet door was half open. A thin black line of space revealed darkness inside. Lena moved across the room and pushed it shut with her foot, casual, like she did it without thinking. The door clicked into the frame, and the click sounded louder than it should have, as if the wood were hollow. "Do you want to put your stuff here?" she asked. She pointed at a corner near the desk. I set my backpack down and tried to make my body relax. Haley and Nora were supposed to arrive later, closer to dinner. For a few minutes, it was just me and Lena, the 2 of us folding out sleeping bags and arguing about which side of the bed would be better to sleep near. The fan made a dry, rhythmic rattle. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn, the engine rising and falling, a distant mechanical growl. When Lena left to help her mom with drinks, I was alone in her room for maybe 3 minutes. That was all. 3 minutes is nothing. I didn't even sit down. I stood near the desk, scrolling through my phone, and listened to the house settle around me. That's when I heard the closet. It wasn't a dramatic sound. No creak like in movies. It was a tiny, careful noise, as if a fingernail had dragged along the inside of the door. A soft scrape, then silence. I froze, my thumb hovering above the screen. The fan rattled. The lawnmower outside cut out with a sudden, clean absence. The room felt larger in the quiet. I turned my head slowly toward the closet door. The handle, one of those round brass knobs, was still. The line where the door met the frame was intact. Nothing had moved. I told myself it was the fan, or the house settling, or one of those small noises you only notice when you're alone and waiting for something to happen. I kept my phone in my hand, but the light from the screen felt wrong, too bright, like a spotlight. I looked away from the closet and toward the bed, the posters, the harmless clutter. Ordinary. This was ordinary. Then I smelled something that didn't belong. It was faint at first, like damp paper. Then it sharpened into the unmistakable odor of wet earth, the smell you get when you lift a flower pot and see soil that hasn't seen sun in weeks. It didn't match the detergent, the pizza scent drifting up from downstairs, the warm plastic smell of the fan. It was cold and dark, and it seemed to come from the closet. I took one step toward it before I realized I was doing it. My chest felt tight, not with fear yet, but with a kind of alert curiosity. My hand reached out, stupid reflex, toward the door. I didn't touch the knob. I stopped a few centimeters away. The brass looked duller up close, as if it had been handled too many times, oils worn into it. Another sound, this time not a scrape. A faint, shallow exhale. It could have been the fan pushing air. It could have been my own breath. But it seemed to come from behind the door, from that sealed darkness. The hair on my arms lifted in slow waves. I realized I was holding my own breath, the way you do when you're trying not to make noise around a sleeping animal. I stepped back. My heel bumped the leg of the desk. The sound was small, but in that quiet it snapped. Immediately the smell weakened, as if it had been pulled back through a crack. The room returned to itself, hot, lived in, Lena's perfume lingering on her pillow. I didn't open the closet. I didn't call out. I just stood there with my phone clenched in my hand, waiting for Lena to come back, listening to the old house breathe. When she finally returned, carrying a stack of plastic cups, her face was bright with forced normality. She set the cups on the desk and talked about what movie we should watch first. I nodded at the right times, but my eyes kept sliding back to the closet door. At one point she noticed. Her voice faltered mid-sentence, just a fraction. She followed my gaze. For a second, her expression went blank, like a screen losing signal. Then she smiled again. "It sticks sometimes," she said too quickly. "The door. It's been like that since forever." I wanted to ask what she meant by sticks. I wanted to say, "I think something is in there." Instead, I heard my own voice come out thin and careful. "Oh," I said. "Okay." We both pretended that was the end of it. Downstairs, the smell of baking garlic bread filled the kitchen. Lena's mom laughed at something on the radio. The house was full of normal sounds, dishes clinking, a cabinet closing, the dog's nails clicking on tile. I let myself believe my moment alone had been nothing. I told myself I was already inventing stories, already making the ordinary feel charged, because that's what people do when they're 15 and stuck between childhood and the adult world. But as the afternoon slid into evening and the light in Lena's room shifted from yellow to gray, I kept noticing small details that didn't fit. The way the hall outside her door stayed dim even when the overhead light was on. The way the air near the closet always felt colder than the rest of the room. The way the fan, whenever it oscillated toward that side, seemed to slow as if it met resistance. I didn't say any of it out loud. I didn't want to be the person who ruined the night with nervousness. I wanted to be easygoing. I wanted to be normal. By the time Haley and Nora arrived, the sky had turned the color of bruised denim. Their voices filled the room bright and loud, and for a while the energy pushed my unease into the background. We ate pizza on the floor, greasy paper plates balanced on our knees. We argued about what to watch. We took pictures with Lena's Polaroid camera, shaking the prints as if motion would make the images appear faster. We were just girls in a bedroom, trying on a temporary version of independence. Still, every time someone shifted their sleeping bag closer to the closet, something in me tightened. Not fear exactly. More like a warning my body couldn't translate into words. At 9:30, Lena's mom poked her head in to remind us to keep the volume down. The hallway light behind her cast a long shadow into the room. As she spoke, her eyes drifted briefly to the closet, and her smile tightened around the edges. She didn't comment. She just told us goodnight and shut the door. The moment the latch clicked, I felt the room change. It's hard to explain without making it sound supernatural from the start, which is not what it was like in the moment. It was subtle. Like the difference between being in a room alone and being in a room with someone standing silently behind you. Nothing visible changed, but the air seemed to press closer, and the small noises we made, laughter, snack wrappers, the fans' rattle, felt like they were being listened to. I told myself it was just the beginning of a long night. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was imagining patterns because I didn't know Haley well, and I felt exposed in someone else's house. Then, as we turned off the overhead light and left only Lena's bedside lamp on, Nora pointed at the closet and said, casually, like she was commenting on a poster, "Why do you keep that closed?" Lena's head snapped toward her. "What?" "The closet," Nora said. She popped a piece of popcorn into her mouth, chewing slowly. "It's always closed when I'm here." "You don't even get anything out of it," Lena laughed, but the sound was too sharp. "Because it's a mess. My mom keeps telling me to organize it." Haley looked from one of us to the other, curious. "Is it like stuffed with clothes?" "Yeah," Lena said. "Just junk," Nora shrugged. "Okay. It's just weird. Like you're guarding it." Lena opened her mouth, then closed it. Her fingers curled around the edge of her blanket. "Can we not make everything weird?" she said. "It's just a closet." The room went quiet for a beat. I felt my pulse in my wrists. Haley shifted, her sleeping bag crinkling. Outside, somewhere in the neighborhood, a car door slammed and an engine started, then faded. Nora lifted her hands in surrender. "Fine. Sorry. I was just saying." Lena forced another laugh and reached for the remote. The TV glowed softly, painting our faces in pale light. The closet door stayed shut, the brass knob catching a dull reflection from the lamp. I watched that knob the way you watch a stranger's hands on a crowded train, without meaning to, but unable not to. I didn't want anything to happen. I also couldn't stop anticipating it. That night, the first night of the sleepover, was the last time in my life I believed that a house was just a house. Dubber. Background. If you'd asked me back then what I believed about ghosts, I would have given you the careful answer teenagers give when they don't want to sound childish. I would have said I didn't believe in anything paranormal. I would have said fear is a trick of the brain, that stories are just stories. I'd grown up in an apartment where the night was full of normal human noise, plumbing, neighbors, sirens far away, so the idea of a house being alive belonged to movies, not to my life. Lena's house was not the kind of place that advertised itself as eerie. It was an older home, yes, but it was bright in the day and warm in the way that comes from constant occupation. The porch had hanging plants. The living room had family photos. The kitchen always smelled like coffee grounds and dish soap. When you walked inside, you could hear the refrigerator cycling and the soft clack of Jasper's nails on the floor. If you drove past on a Saturday, you would have seen Lena's dad rinsing a car, or Lena's mom shaking out a rug. Nothing about the outside suggested anything hidden. I'd been there plenty of times before that night, but always in the daytime, and always with an endpoint. I never stayed long enough for the rooms to change with the dark. I never listened to it when the neighborhood quieted and the house became the loudest thing around. I knew Lena's room, her posters, and her rattling fan. I knew the hall carpet was worn down the center. I knew the bathroom door stuck unless you lifted the handle. Nothing about it felt like a setting for anything unreal. The only thing I couldn't quite file away was Lena herself. Months earlier in winter, we had been working at her desk, and she stopped mid-sentence, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She tilted her head, eyes fixed on the closet like she was trying to catch a sound before it faded. I asked what was wrong. She blinked and said she thought she heard her mom, but her mom wasn't home. After that, she kept her chair angled, so her back wasn't fully to the closet. I noticed it in the moment, and then told myself it meant nothing. There were other small habits, too. Lena never left the closet open, even for a second. She changed clothes from the dresser, not from hanging items. She always shut her bedroom door behind us, even in the afternoon. If we went to the bathroom, she'd turn the hallway light on and leave it on until we were back inside her room. If I joked about it, she'd smile, but her smile would look like a reflex, not like amusement. I told myself those were just quirks. Everyone has them. Some families are strict about doors and lights. Some people hate clutter. Some people feel watched in their own homes for reasons that have nothing to do with anything supernatural. I built explanations the way you stack books against a drafty window, not because it fixes the cold, but because it makes you feel like you've done something. The sleepover changed that because it lasted long enough for the house to stop being a place we visited and start being a place we were trapped inside. It also put other people in the room. Nora, who didn't soften her thoughts. Haley, who listened too carefully. Me, who didn't want to be the dramatic one. Together we made a small audience, and Lena's habits stopped looking like personal preferences and started looking like precautions. Nora had known Lena since they were little. Their backyards touched. Nora had the kind of bluntness that adults sometimes mistook for confidence. If something felt off, she said it out loud and waited for the world to argue with her. Haley was new to our group, quiet in a way that didn't feel shy so much as deliberate. She wore a small silver charm on a chain at her throat, and her eyes moved around the room the way someone's eyes move in a new house, cataloging exits, measuring distances without meaning to. I didn't know what any of us were about to become to each other. I didn't know the sleepover would split my life into before and after. All I knew in the beginning was the ordinary excitement of being allowed to stay up late and the low-grade discomfort that had started the moment I saw Lena push the closet door shut with her foot. Even while we watched movies and ate pizza, that discomfort stayed like a thin wire under my skin. Lena kept lowering the volume, just a click at a time, as if she were trying to hear something beneath the sound. When Jasper barked downstairs, a single sharp bark that cut off too quickly, Lena answered immediately, too fast. He's weird at night. He barks at shadows. Nora, half asleep, muttered that dogs don't bark at shadows. Lena's reply came out before she seemed to think, he does in this house. Haley asked what she meant, soft enough that the question nearly disappeared into the movie. Lena brushed it off. Old house. Sounds. The kind of answer you give when you want the conversation to stop. But Nora didn't let it stop. She said Jasper barked at the closet too. She pointed at it, not theatrically, just an ordinary gesture that made the air in the room feel tighter. Lena's face changed. The muscles around her mouth drew inward. She whispered, "Stop," like she wasn't talking to Nora so much as asking the room for mercy. That was the moment I understood there was a rule in that house we didn't know, and we had just stepped over it. Tucker, first irregularities. The first truly wrong thing happened after midnight, when the house had settled into that hollow quiet that only exists after everyone else is asleep. The movie had ended without any of us really noticing. The TV screen had gone black, reflecting our own pale faces for a moment before timing out. Lena turned it off completely, and the click of the button sounded final, like a seal. We lay there in our sleeping bags, the four of us arranged in a loose circle on the floor. The bedside lamp stayed on, dimmed as low as it could go without going dark. Its light barely reached the corners of the room. The closet remained in shadow, its outline just visible, a darker rectangle within the dark. No one spoke for a while. The fan rattled, pushing warm air that smelled faintly of pizza grease and fabric softener. Somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator hummed. I could hear Lena breathing beside me, too shallow, too controlled, like she was trying not to be heard. It was Nora who broke the silence, her voice low and unguarded in a way that only happens when people think everyone else is half asleep. "Do you hear that?" I held my breath. Haley shifted slightly, the nylon of her sleeping bag whispering against the carpet. "Hear what?" Lena asked. Her voice sounded different now, stripped of its daytime brightness. Nora didn't answer right away. She was listening. We all were, suddenly tuned to the same frequency. At first I thought she meant the fan, or the house itself. But then I caught it too. A soft rhythmic sound. Not steady enough to be mechanical. Not random enough to be the house settling. It was coming from somewhere close. From the wall behind Lena's bed, or from the closet just to the side of it. Tap. Pause.
Tap!
It reminded me of the sound someone makes when they drum their fingers on a table while thinking. That, Nora said finally. Lena sat up so fast her sleeping bag slid down around her waist. It's nothing, she said immediately, too loudly. The pipes. They do that. Haley pushed herself up on one elbow. Her eyes were fixed on the closet. That's not pipes, she said. She didn't sound scared. She sounded certain. The tapping stopped. The sudden absence of it made the room feel exposed, like when a generator cuts out and you realize how much noise was covering the silence. My ears rang faintly. My heart beat hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. We waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing happened. Nora snorted softly. See? It stopped when we listened. That doesn't mean anything, Lena said. Her hands were clenched in the blanket. Can we just go to sleep? She lay back down, turning her face toward the wall, her back to the rest of us. The message was clear. Conversation over. I wanted to let it be. I wanted to close my eyes and let exhaustion pull me under. But now that the sound had been named, my body wouldn't relax. Every sense felt sharpened, like I was waiting for an exam I hadn't studied for. I watched the closet door. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Time stretched and thinned. Just as I started to believe nothing else would happen, the smell returned. Not all at once. It seeped into the room slowly, like water creeping under a door. Damp earth, rotting leaves, something old and enclosed. It layered itself over the ordinary smells until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Haley noticed it too. I could tell by the way her nose wrinkled slightly, by the way her hand drifted unconsciously to the charm at her throat. Does it smell weird in here? She whispered. Lena didn't respond. Nora sat up again, this time without speaking. She crawled a little closer to the closet, curiosity pulling her forward despite the tension in her shoulders. Don't, Lena said. The word came out sharp, edged with something close to panic. Nora froze, one hand braced on the carpet. She looked back at Lena, confused. Don't what? Just don't go over there, Lena said. Her voice dropped. Please. The word please hung in the air, heavy and intimate. It was the kind of plea you make when you don't have the energy to explain anymore. Nora hesitated, then shrugged and sat back. Okay, she said. I won't. The room exhaled. I realized I'd been holding my breath again. We lay there in silence, the smell thick now, undeniable. I pressed my face into my sleeping bag, trying to block it out, but it clung to the fabric, to my hair. My stomach rolled with a slow, uneasy nausea. That was when the scratching started. Not tapping this time. Not rhythmic. It was irregular, hesitant, like something testing a surface. A soft scrape, then a pause. Another scrape, slightly longer. It came from the closet door itself. Lena made a small sound, half sob, half whimper. She pulled her blanket over her head. Nora whispered my name. Haley's fingers dug into my arm, hard enough to hurt. I stared at the closet, my eyes burning. The door didn't move. The knob stayed still. But the sound continued, careful and deliberate, as if whatever was inside knew exactly how much noise it could make without forcing the door open. Then, very faintly, I heard something else. Breathing. Not the rush of air from the fan. Not the shallow breaths of the girls around me. This was slower. Deeper. It dragged slightly, like air passing through something that wasn't meant to breathe anymore. I didn't scream. None of us did. We were locked in place by the sheer wrongness of it, by the way our minds refused to fully accept what our bodies already knew. The scratching stopped. The breathing continued for 3 more breaths. Then it was gone. The smell faded with it, retreating back into the darkness behind the door. The room returned to its fragile normality. The fan, the lamp, 4 girls lying rigid on the floor. No one spoke. No one moved. Eventually, exhaustion won. One by one, despite the terror coiled tight in my chest, I slipped into a shallow, fractured sleep. The image of the closet door burned into my thoughts. That was only the beginning. Read, Escalating tension, I woke up without knowing what had pulled me out of sleep. There was no loud noise, no clear interruption. It was more like my body had decided, without consulting me, that it was no longer safe to be unconscious. My eyes opened to darkness, softened by the weak glow of the bedside lamp, which was still on, unchanged. For a few seconds I didn't move. I listened. The house sounded different in the early hours of the morning. The refrigerator's hum was louder, more insistent. The fan rattled unevenly, like it was struggling against resistance. Somewhere deep in the walls, there was a low creak that rose and fell, slow and patient, as if the house were stretching. My mouth was dry. My tongue felt too large for my teeth. I swallowed and tasted dust. Haley was awake. I could tell because her eyes were open, reflecting the lamplight. She was lying perfectly still, her hands folded over her chest, fingers wrapped tightly around the small charm at her throat. When she noticed me looking at her, her eyes shifted slightly, just enough to acknowledge me. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Nora was asleep, her mouth open, one arm flung out of her sleeping bag. Lena was turned toward the wall, her blanket pulled up to her ears. I couldn't see her face, but her shoulders were tense, as if she hadn't really slept at all. Then I heard it again. Not scratching. Not tapping. A soft, dragging sound, low and continuous, like fabric being pulled slowly across carpet. It came from inside the room. My heart rate spiked so suddenly it made me dizzy. I scanned the floor, expecting to see Nora shifting in her sleep, or one of us moving without realizing it. No one was moving. The sound continued. Slow. Careful. Deliberate. It was coming from the narrow strip of floor between the closet door and the wall. My breath caught painfully in my chest. The air felt colder near the floor, dense enough that it seemed to press against my skin. The smell returned too, stronger now, no longer creeping but blooming, filling my nose and throat until I tasted it at the back of my mouth. Damp earth, rot, something sweet underneath it, like decay that had gone too far. Haley's fingers tightened around her charm. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The dragging sound stopped. For a moment there was nothing. The silence felt intentional, like a pause meant to test us. Then the closet door moved. Not opening, not even visibly shifting. The brass knob turned, just slightly, enough for the metal to catch the lamplight and throw it back at us, in a dull, warped reflection. Lena made a sound then, a sharp intake of breath that scraped her throat raw. She rolled onto her back, eyes wide, staring straight at the closet. Her face was pale, her expression stripped bare of any attempt at denial. "No," she whispered. It wasn't addressed to us. It was a plea directed at the door itself. The knob turned a fraction more. I felt my body lock into a strange, heavy stillness, like every muscle had seized at once. My hands were numb. My feet felt impossibly far away. I couldn't even scream if I'd wanted to. All I could do was watch. Haley shook her head slowly, once, as if refusing something only she could see. Nora stirred, confused, muttering something incoherent. The knob stopped turning. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, from behind the door, came a sound I will never forget. A voice. It was quiet. So quiet I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. It didn't form words. It was more like an attempt at speech, a wet, broken murmur that rose and fell without language. It sounded strained, like vocal cords that hadn't been used in a long time. Lena began to cry silently, tears sliding into her hair. She pressed her hands over her ears, but the sound wasn't loud enough to block. It wasn't meant to be loud. It was meant to be heard only by us. Nora sat up fully now, panic snapping her awake. "What is that?" she whispered. Lena didn't answer. The voice dragged on for a few more seconds, then cut off abruptly, as if someone had decided to stop trying. The knob returned to its original position. The smell receded. The room was left wrecked in its wake, charged and trembling, like air after a lightning strike. None of us slept after that. We sat there until morning, backs pressed together, the lamp burning our eyes. When the sky outside finally began to lighten, the relief I felt was thin and fragile, already fraying at the edges. Because with daylight came something worse. Lena finally spoke. "I didn't want you to stay over," she said hoarsely. "I told my mom no one should." She didn't listen. Her eyes never left the closet. It doesn't like new people. Critical incident. Lena's words didn't land all at once. They seeped into me slowly like the smell had, filling spaces I hadn't realized were empty. It doesn't like new people. The sentence was vague enough to sound irrational, but specific enough to make my stomach drop. Not it's broken. Not something lives here. It doesn't like... What doesn't? Nora asked. Her voice shook despite her attempt to sound steady. Lena swallowed. The movement of her throat was exaggerated, painful to watch. "I don't know what it is," she said. "I just know it's been there longer than we have." Haley asked quietly, "In the closet?" Lena nodded. The daylight was stronger now, filtering through the blinds in thin, dusty stripes. The room looked smaller in the morning, cluttered and childish, as if the night had exaggerated its proportions. The closet door sat exactly as it always had, closed and still. In the light it looked harmless. Ridiculous, even. A white wooden door with chipped paint near the bottom. Nora let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, but wasn't. "Okay," she said. "Okay. This is not funny anymore." "It was never funny," Lena replied. There was no anger in her voice, just exhaustion. We decided, without saying it out loud, to open the door. I don't know who suggested it first. Maybe no one did. Maybe the idea formed between us, unspoken but inevitable. The night had taken something from us already. Sleep, safety, the illusion that we could ignore the problem and it would go away. The closed door had become unbearable. Whatever was behind it had already crossed a line. Keeping it shut no longer felt like protection. It felt like surrender. Lena stood first. Her movements were stiff, mechanical, like she was afraid her body might refuse if she hesitated. She walked toward the closet with careful, measured steps. Each one sounded too loud on the carpet. "Don't," Haley whispered, but she didn't move to stop her. Nora got to her feet as well, positioning herself slightly behind Lena, close enough to grab her if she needed to. I followed, my legs trembling so badly I had to focus on not falling over. The four of us stood there, a small line facing a door that suddenly felt enormous. Lena reached for the knob. Up close, I could see how worn it was, the brass dulled and smoothed by countless touches. It felt wrong that something so ordinary could be the boundary between us and whatever had been breathing on the other side hours earlier. Lena hesitated, her hand hovering. Her breathing sped up. "I hear it sometimes," she said suddenly. "During the day. Not like last night. Just moving. Like it's adjusting." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Nora asked. Lena's mouth twisted. "Who would believe me?" That silenced all of us. Her fingers closed around the knob. It was cold. I could see it in the way her hand flinched almost imperceptibly. She twisted. The door didn't open. She tried again, harder this time. The knob turned, but the door stayed shut, like it was stuck on something from the inside. "That's not funny," Nora said, but no one laughed. Lena leaned her shoulder into it. The door shuddered, then gave way with a dry, splintering sound, as whatever had been bracing it released. The smell hit us immediately, so strong it made my eyes water. Damp earth, rot, something sweet and cloying beneath it that turned my stomach. Haley gagged, clapping a hand over her mouth. The inside of the closet was dark, the light from the room barely penetrating it. At first glance, it looked wrong. Too deep. Like the space extended farther back than the dimensions of the room should allow. There were clothes inside, or what had once been clothes. They hung limp and misshapen, fabrics stiff with age and moisture. Dresses that might have been fashionable decades ago. Shirts with collars yellowed and curling. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust that clung to the air when the door opened, sparkling faintly in the light. But the floor of the closet was bare. No boxes, no shoes. Just carpet, darker than the rest of the room, pressed flat as if something heavy had spent a long time resting there. And in the center of that space were marks, indentations, shallow, irregular depressions in the carpet, like the outline of a body that had been lying there for years. Not a clear shape, not dramatic, just wrong enough that my brain struggled to categorize it. Haley made a low sound in her throat. Someone was in there. No, Lena said. Her voice broke. Something is. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Goosebumps rippled across my arms. The smell intensified, thick enough to taste. My vision tunneled, the edges darkening. Then the breathing started again. Not behind the door this time. Inside the closet. It came from low to the ground, slow and wet, each inhale dragging, each exhale rattling softly, like air passing through debris. The indentations in the carpet deepened slightly, as if weight were settling into them. Nora screamed. The sound shattered whatever fragile control the moment had. Haley stumbled backward, tripping over her sleeping bag. I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring as the fabric hanging inside the closet began to sway, not from air, but as if something unseen were brushing past it. The breathing grew louder. Lena stepped forward, sobbing now, tears streaming down her face. Please, she said. Please stop. The indentations shifted. Slowly, deliberately, they began to rise. Not lifting off the ground. Not forming a shape. Just swelling, like something pushing upward from beneath the carpet. The fibers stretched, threads straining. The air vibrated with a low, almost imperceptible hum that I felt more than heard. Then a hand pressed up from beneath the carpet. It didn't break through. The outline was visible, warped by fabric, fingers too long, joints bent at wrong angles. It moved, testing, pressing harder, as if learning the resistance of the surface. Haley screamed then too, a thin, high sound that tore at my ears. The hand withdrew suddenly. The breathing stopped. The closet went still. For a split second, there was nothing but the echo of our screams and the pounding of my heart. Then the door slammed shut on its own with a force that rattled the walls. The lamp flickered. The fan died mid-rattle, blades grinding to a halt. The room plunged into silence. We didn't wait to understand. We didn't stop to think. We ran. We tore out of the room, down the narrow hallway, our feet thudding on the worn carpet. The hallway light flickered on and off as we passed, reacting to something unseen. The air felt thick, resistant, like moving through water. Downstairs, Lena's mom shouted in alarm as we burst into the living room, sobbing and incoherent. Jasper barked wildly, hackles raised, his eyes fixed on the staircase. We didn't go back upstairs. Aftermath. The police came first, because that is what adults do when children are screaming and shaking and unable to form sentences. I remember sitting on the living room couch, knees pulled to my chest, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like detergent and dog hair. My teeth wouldn't stop chattering, even though the house was warm. Lena's mom kept apologizing over and over, her hands fluttering uselessly, her face pale and tight with fear she didn't yet understand. We tried to explain. We really did. Between sobs and half-finished sentences, we told them about the sounds, the smell, the closet. About the door opening. About the carpet. The words felt flimsy as soon as they left my mouth, like paper shapes collapsing in the rain. I could see it on the officers' faces, the careful neutrality, the subtle shift into something clinical and dismissive. Kids scare themselves. Sleepovers do that. Old houses make noises. They went upstairs anyway. We sat there listening, every footstep upstairs making my muscles seize. I expected screaming. I expected chaos. Instead, there were only muffled voices, the sound of doors opening and closing, the heavy tread of adult certainty moving through spaces that had felt forbidden hours earlier. After maybe 10 minutes, one of the officers came back down. He told us they'd checked the room, the closet. Everything looked normal. No signs of forced entry. No damage. No smell. I knew then that whatever had happened upstairs was over. Not gone. Just hidden again. Lena's parents insisted we all go home. No one argued. Our parents arrived one by one, confusion giving way to irritation, then concern. I remember my mom gripping the steering wheel too tightly on the drive back, asking me what happened, telling me it was probably a nightmare. I stared out the window and watched the streetlights pass, each one briefly illuminating the inside of the car before leaving us in darkness again. I didn't sleep when I got home. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the pressure of that unseen hand against the carpet, the way the fibers had strained, the certainty that something had been right there, inches away from breaking through. I lay in my own bed, surrounded by familiar sounds, and felt no comfort in them. School tried to resume its normal rhythm, but none of us were the same. Nora stopped coming to class a week later. Her parents said she was sick. Then they said she'd transferred. I never saw her again. When I tried to text her, my messages stayed unread. Haley lasted longer. She grew quieter, thinner. Dark circles bloomed under her eyes. Once, during class, I noticed her fingers moving against her desk, tapping in an uneven rhythm that made my stomach twist. Tap! Pause. Tap. When she caught me looking, she stopped immediately and pressed her hand flat, like she was afraid of it. She dropped out before winter. Lena stayed, but something in her had collapsed inward. She stopped inviting people over. She stopped staying after school. The lightness she used to carry was gone, replaced by a constant, brittle vigilance. We didn't talk about that night. Not really. Every time the subject came close, her face shut down completely, like a door locking from the inside. A month after the sleepover, Lena's family moved out. There was no dramatic explanation. No fire. No crime scene. Her mom told people it was because of work, because of finances, because the house was too big. The house went up for sale quietly. I watched from across the street one afternoon as a moving truck pulled away, the windows dark and empty behind it. I half expected something to appear at one of them, a shape watching us leave. Nothing did. The house sold within the year. New people moved in. A family with 2 small children. I saw them sometimes playing in the yard, laughing. Life continued. It always does. I graduated. I moved away. I grew older. I told myself the story belonged to a younger version of me, one more susceptible to fear, to imagination. I learned the language of psychology. I learned about shared delusions, about stress responses, about how the brain fills in gaps under pressure. I learned all the ways to explain what happened without ever explaining it. It almost worked. Then years later, I had a dream. In the dream, I was standing in Lena's old room, exactly as it had been that night. The posters, the fan, the dim lamp. The closet door was open. Inside, there were no clothes, no carpet, just darkness, deep and endless, breathing slowly, patiently. I woke up gasping, my sheets twisted around my legs, my room filled with the smell of damp earth. I moved apartments the next week. I don't do sleepovers anymore. I don't sleep in unfamiliar houses if I can avoid it. I keep my closet doors closed always, even in the day. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I think I hear something testing the boundaries of my space. A soft scrape, a careful breath. I never investigate. Some things don't need to follow you to stay with you. Story 2. Introduction. I didn't realize right away that my husband was changing. At first it was barely noticeable, like when the water temperature shifts while you're washing your hands because someone opened another tap somewhere in the apartment. You feel it, but you can't point to the exact moment and say, this is where it changed. We had been living together for 7 years, and our life was built out of dependable repetitions. The same mugs on the top shelf, the same route to work, the same habit of turning off the hallway light before reaching the bedroom. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building. The stairwell always smelled of damp concrete and someone else's cooking, usually potatoes or cabbage. In winter, cold crept in through the stairwell window. In summer, there was a humid dust smell, as if the walls absorbed every hot night. In the hallway, we had a narrow wardrobe with a mirror. It reflected coat hangers and a slice of the dark corridor. In the evenings, when I came home, the kitchen light spilled into the hallway as a thin strip, and by that strip, I could tell whether he was home. Before, I heard him immediately, the kettle, the low sound of the TV, the short clink of a mug against the countertop. Later, the light would still be on, but the apartment no longer answered with familiar sounds. His name was Maxim. He had never been a man of loud emotions, but being near him used to feel calm, like standing next to a lamp in a dark corner. He knew how to be present, a hand on my shoulder, passing by and leaving behind the smell of soap, asking whether I had eaten without turning it into a big deal. Over time, that disappeared. He sat on the same couch, but it was as if he was in another room. A distance formed between us that couldn't be measured in meters. It was measured by the way he turned his shoulder when I entered the living room, and by how his gaze lingered not on my face, but on the door frame or the dark rectangle of the phone in his hand. At first I told myself it was work. He worked in IT, deadlines, tasks, calls, other people's expectations. I asked how his day was. He answered shortly and too evenly. Fine. Sometimes he added, tired. His voice didn't tremble, but something dry appeared in it, as if he were speaking through paper. I tried not to push. I cooked dinner, put a plate in front of him, talked about small things from my day to fill the silence with something ordinary. He nodded, sometimes smiled, but the smile never reached his eyes. Then his habits changed. His phone, which used to lie on the kitchen table or the windowsill, was always with him now. He took it even into the bathroom and held it in a way that blocked the screen from any angle. When I came closer, he made a barely noticeable movement with his elbow, like someone protecting a bag in a crowd. Nothing sharp, nothing obvious, just small defensive gestures that made my stomach tighten. The nights were worse. Maxime had always slept heavily and calmly. He lay down, turned once or twice, and disappeared into deep sleep. His breathing was even. Sometimes he snored softly. I loved that sound. It was proof of normality. Then he started waking up. First once a night, then twice. He got up without a word and went into the hallway. I heard the floor creak and the quiet closing of the bathroom door. The water didn't turn on. The light didn't turn on. He just stood there. I lay in bed, listening to the silence behind the door, feeling the tension rise from my stomach to my throat, as if my body was trying to warn me before my mind could invent an explanation. I asked once, "Are you sleeping badly?" "A little," he said. Then almost immediately added, "It'll pass." The words were meant to calm me, but they sounded rehearsed, like a phrase learned in advance. Then he smiled. The smile was correct but foreign. His lips moved, but his eyes stayed empty. At the same time, other things began happening that couldn't be explained by simple exhaustion. He started leaving earlier and coming back later without any clear pattern. Sometimes he returned at the usual time, but he smelled of cold air and something metallic, like wet coins. He began doing his own laundry. Before we ran the washing machine together, or I did it out of habit. Now he separated his clothes and washed them at night. I woke up to the dull rumble of the drum and the sharp smell of detergent, too strong for the darkness. In the morning, the laundry was already hanging in neat rows, as if someone had arranged order carefully to leave no accidents. I caught myself checking simple things. Was the balcony door closed? The gas turned off? The windows? It looked like my anxiety, and I tried to shame myself for it. But shame doesn't stop the body from reacting before the mind. I noticed how my skin cooled when he passed by, how my stomach tightened when he stayed silent for too long, staring at his screen, how I started walking more quietly, as if I didn't want to be noticed in my own apartment. Then Maxim started closing doors. Not the ones people usually close, bathroom, toilet, bedroom. He began closing the kitchen door even when he was cooking, closing the living room door when he sat with his laptop. Sometimes I approached and heard him typing, fast, even keystrokes, almost without pauses. When I knocked, he didn't answer right away. 1 second, 2, 3. Then a short click, as if he minimized or closed something, and only then. "Yeah?" His voice sounded like I had interrupted something important. I kept telling myself it was projects, that he just didn't want distractions. But one day, when he went out to the store and left his laptop on the table, the screen hadn't gone dark yet. A page was open in dark mode, a list of threads, usernames, timestamps, short fragments of messages. It didn't look like a work chat. It didn't look like a social network. It was a forum. At the top of the page, as the section title, were words that made my mouth go dry. Ritual murders. I didn't read further. Not because I respected boundaries, but because I was afraid of what I would understand. The fear was physical. Nausea under my ribs, weakness in my knees, dryness in my mouth. Ordinary sounds continued in the apartment, the ticking of the clock, distant traffic, the hum of the refrigerator. Against that normality, the screen with those words looked like a hole in reality. I stepped back as if from a hot stove and started washing dishes, even though there were almost none. Water ran, foam stuck to my hands, and I tried to convince myself it could be anything. Discussions of a movie, a book, crime reports, other people's stories. I searched for explanations that would allow me not to connect those words to Maxime, because if I did, I would have to admit that I was living next to a person I did not know. But when he came back, the first thing he did was go to the table and open the laptop, as if checking whether something was still there. Only after that did he ask if I wanted tea. His voice was soft, almost caring. That care made it worse, because it sounded like a mask put on too quickly. He looked at me more closely than usual, as if checking whether something had changed in me. That night I lay in bed, staring into the dark, listening to his breathing beside me. It was even, but between breaths there were pauses, slightly longer than they should have been. I caught those pauses, and in each one I imagined a decision: to tell him directly what I had seen, or to stay silent. I chose silence. At the time, it felt like caution, like a need to understand first. Now I know it was the first moment fear became part of our home, because once a secret enters a house, it changes not only the one who hides it, but the one who lives beside it. Throughout her background. Before all of this, my marriage looked ordinary from the outside. That word, ordinary, is important, because it's what made everything that followed so difficult to process. There were no dramatic arguments, no obvious cruelty, no sudden personality shift that would have justified immediate fear. Maxime and I met in our mid-20s, when our lives were still soft around the edges, unfinished. We built things slowly, routines, compromises, shared habits that made the days pass without friction. He was precise in the way some people are precise not because they're controlling, but because structure makes them feel safe. He lined up his shoes by the door, not obsessively, just evenly. He washed his mug immediately after using it. He preferred dim lighting in the evenings, claiming bright light gave him headaches. I learned these things early and adjusted without thinking. Relationships are built on these small adjustments, and at the time they felt mutual. We didn't argue much. When we disagreed, it was quiet and restrained. He listened. I spoke. He nodded. Things were resolved, or at least placed on a shelf labeled later. There was never a sense that something was festering underneath. Or if there was, I didn't know how to see it yet. Our apartment reflected that balance. Neutral colors, clean surfaces. Nothing sharp or expressive. Friends described it as calm. I like that word. Calm meant safe. Calm meant predictable. I worked long hours myself, and coming home to that space felt like stepping into a controlled environment where nothing unexpected could happen. Maxime spent most evenings on his computer even before things changed. That was normal. He liked forums, long discussions about niche topics, technology, history, obscure documentaries. He enjoyed reading more than speaking. I sometimes teased him that he knew more about strangers online than about our neighbors. He smiled at that. At least he used to. I didn't monitor what he read. I never felt the need to. We had passwords for practical reasons, online banking, shared subscriptions, but we didn't check each other's messages. Trust wasn't something we discussed. It simply existed like furniture you stop noticing because it's always been there. Looking back now, I can see small details that didn't alarm me then because they fit too well into the picture of who I believed he was. His interest in true crime, for example. It was casual, or so it seemed. A podcast playing softly while he cooked. A documentary on in the background. He said it helped him relax because everything in those stories was already over, already contained. I accepted that explanation without resistance. Sometimes he would pause a video and rewind a section, watching it again with intense focus. I would ask what caught his attention. He'd shrug and say something technical. The timeline didn't add up. The investigation was sloppy. The narrative was exaggerated. It sounded analytical, not emotional. Rational. Safe. I didn't notice when that focus sharpened into something else. There was a period, months maybe, where he seemed almost energized in a way that didn't match his exhaustion. He slept less but complained less. He drank more coffee but didn't seem jittery. He smiled to himself while reading things on his screen, the way people do when they recognize something familiar. I assumed it was work-related, or online debates, or nothing important. We stopped inviting people over around that time, not abruptly, gradually. First one canceled dinner, then another. Maxime said he preferred quiet evenings. That hosting made him tired. I didn't argue. I was tired too. Isolation can look like rest when it happens slowly. The apartment grew quieter. Not peaceful, quiet in a hollow way. Sounds traveled farther. I could hear the hum of his computer fan from the bedroom. The click of keys echoed slightly, as if the walls were thinner than before. Sometimes I woke up early and found him already awake, sitting at the table in the half-dark, screen illuminating his face from below. He looked different in that light. Sharper, more intent. When I asked what time he went to bed, he gave vague answers. Late. Didn't sleep much. Always said without irritation, but also without detail. As if the details were irrelevant or private. I started to feel like a guest in my own life. The forums came up once, casually. I asked what he was reading so intensely. He said, just discussions. I asked about what. He paused, just long enough for me to notice, and then said, history, anthropology, belief systems. It sounded academic. I nodded and didn't ask more. I wish now that I had, after I saw the words ritual murders on his screen, those past conversations rearranged themselves in my mind. Like puzzle pieces that finally snapped into place, forming an image I didn't want to see. His interest hadn't appeared out of nowhere. It had been growing quietly, nourished by anonymity, by distance, by my trust. What unsettled me most wasn't just the topic itself. It was the idea of his activity. This wasn't passive consumption. The page I saw wasn't an article. It was a discussion. Threads, replies, timestamps, participation. Maxime wasn't just reading. He was involved. That realization didn't come with panic at first. It came with a heavy, sinking pressure behind my eyes, like the beginning of a headache that never quite breaks. I started replaying interactions, scanning them for meaning. His late nights, the secrecy, the careful separation of his life from mine. And beneath all of that, a question began to form, slowly, reluctantly, but persistently. At what point does curiosity become something else? And how long had I been living next to a stranger without realizing it? First, irregularities. After I saw that forum page, I became careful in a way that surprised me. Not confrontational careful, not suspicious in any visible sense, but internally restrained, as if any wrong movement might cause something fragile to crack. I paid attention to how I stood in rooms, how long I lingered behind him, how loudly I closed doors. My body adjusted before my thoughts did. Maxime noticed nothing, or if he did, he didn't show it. He continued to behave the way someone behaves when they believe they are unobserved. That more than anything unsettled me. His calm wasn't relief. It was assumption. I began to wake earlier than usual, not intentionally. My sleep grew light and fragmented, as if part of me stayed awake all night listening. I would open my eyes before dawn and lie still, staring at the gray ceiling, hearing his breathing beside me. Sometimes it was steady. Sometimes it wasn't. There were nights when he lay completely still for long stretches, so still I found myself counting seconds between breaths, just to reassure myself that he was there, that he was human, that bodies still worked the way they were supposed to. The computer became a presence in our apartment. Not just an object, but a focal point. When it was on, I felt it the way you feel someone else's attention in a room, quiet, but directed. Maxime angled the screen away from doorways. He lowered the brightness at night. He used headphones more often, even when watching videos. When I asked what he was listening to, he said talks or lectures, vague words that didn't invite follow-up. Once, as I passed behind him, I caught a glimpse of a page before he minimized it. I didn't see words clearly, just blocks of text, dark background, pale lettering, and something that looked like diagrams. Shapes, lines intersecting in deliberate patterns. It was gone before I could process it. I didn't mention it. I began noticing objects out of place. Small things. A notebook in his bag I didn't recognize. Not a work notebook, no company logo, no familiar pen clipped to it. Just a plain black cover, slightly warped at the edges, like it had been handled often. When I asked about it, he said it was for notes and slid it deeper into the bag without opening it. The trash started to bother me, not because of what was in it, but because of what wasn't. He took it out himself now, always at night, sometimes twice in one evening. The bin in the kitchen stayed unusually clean, lined carefully, no scraps lingering. I stopped seeing the random debris of daily life, receipts, packaging, used paper towels. It was as if he curated what remained in the apartment. Once I went down to the trash room earlier than usual, carrying a bag of my own. The bins were nearly empty. It was a weekday. That alone wasn't strange. What was strange was the smell. Not rot, not garbage. Something sharp and mineral, like burned metal or disinfectant. I remember standing there longer than necessary, holding my breath, telling myself not to imagine connections where there were none. When Maxime cooked, he followed recipes more precisely than before. Measured everything. Cleaned surfaces repeatedly while working. He washed his hands often, scrubbing longer than needed, water running hot. I watched his fingers sometimes, how careful they were, how deliberate. He had always been neat, but this was different. This felt practiced. Conversation thinned. When we spoke, it stayed on the surface. Logistics. Schedules. Groceries. If I asked anything personal, how he felt, what he was thinking, he redirected gently, almost kindly, back to neutral ground. I stopped pushing. Pushing felt dangerous, though I couldn't have said why. The forums became harder to avoid noticing. I didn't spy on him directly. I didn't check his phone or open his laptop when he was gone. Instead, I listened. At night, from the bedroom, I could hear the rhythm of his typing from the living room. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't casual either. It had a measured consistency, like someone following a process. Sometimes there were pauses, long ones, followed by a short burst of rapid keystrokes, as if he had been thinking carefully about what to write. One evening I heard him speak out loud while he typed. Not full sentences. Just fragments. Words repeated quietly under his breath, tested for sound. I couldn't make them out, but the tone wasn't conversational. It was rehearsed. I stayed in the bedroom and pretended to sleep. The next morning, I found the bathroom mirror wiped clean. No streaks, no fingerprints. He had done it before leaving for work. That alone meant nothing. Except I didn't remember it ever bothering him before. I began to feel like the apartment itself was holding its breath. There were moments when I caught myself watching him the way you watch someone you don't fully trust, tracking movements, memorizing patterns, building an internal map of behavior. It made me feel disloyal, and the guilt sat heavy in my chest. This was my husband, the man I had chosen, the man who knew the sound of my steps in the hallway, who knew how I took my coffee, who used to reach for my hand without thinking. But alongside the guilt was something colder and more persistent. A sense that whatever he was involved in was not theoretical. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It had weight. It had routine. It had a place in our home. And I was starting to feel like I was living next to a process that did not include me, but was slowly adjusting around my presence. Brought a escalating tension. The shift from discomfort to fear didn't happen in a single moment. It crept in through repetition, through patterns that became impossible to ignore once I saw them clearly. Every day added another small weight, and together they pressed down on my chest until breathing felt like effort. Maxime started altering his schedule in ways that no longer aligned with work. He would leave the apartment late at night, not dressed for anything specific. No gym bag, no work laptop, just his jacket and his phone. When I asked where he was going, he said he needed air, or that he was meeting someone briefly. The answers were vague but delivered calmly, without defensiveness, as if he expected them to be enough. I began checking the time when he left and when he returned. Sometimes he was gone for 20 minutes. Sometimes for over an hour. When he came back, he went straight to the bathroom and washed his hands. Always his hands, sometimes his wrists too. He avoided eye contact during those moments, focusing on the sink, the soap, the water. The smell afterward wasn't just soap, it was something sharper, almost medicinal. I stopped sleeping properly. When I did fall asleep, I woke often, disoriented, my heart already racing. I started keeping track of sounds at night. The refrigerator cycling, a car passing outside, the faint tick of the clock. I noticed when something was missing, when the apartment felt too quiet, when his breathing beside me wasn't there because he hadn't come back yet. One night I woke and reached out, expecting his shoulder. My hand met cold sheets. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting minutes. 42 passed before I heard the key in the lock. He entered quietly, moving with practiced care, as if he had learned how to exist without leaving traces. When he slipped into bed, he turned his back to me immediately. I could smell damp air clinging to his clothes like night fog or concrete after rain. I didn't ask where he'd been. The forums followed him into our physical space in subtle ways. Printouts appeared briefly on the desk and disappeared again. Diagrams. Symbols I didn't recognize. Circular shapes intersected by lines. I told myself they could be anything. Fiction, research, art references. But my body rejected those explanations. My skin prickled when I saw them, the way it does when something is close to danger. One afternoon, while he was in the shower, I heard a notification sound from his laptop. I didn't move at first. I sat on the couch, frozen, staring at the closed bathroom door. The sound came again. Then again, a rapid series like replies stacking up. I stood without deciding to. The laptop screen was open, not locked. A forum thread filled the display. I didn't read everything, just fragments, because that was all I could absorb before my vision narrowed. Usernames I didn't recognize. Replies layered on top of each other. Technical language mixed with reverent tone. References to preparation, conditions, alignment. Someone asked a question about timing. Another user answered with certainty that made my throat tighten. Maxim's username appeared repeatedly. Not passively, not occasionally. He was one of the most active participants in the thread. My ears rang. I felt detached from my body, as if I were observing myself from a distance, standing too close to the desk, hands slightly trembling, breath shallow. I scrolled once, just a little, and saw a message he had posted less than an hour earlier. It wasn't graphic. That was almost worse. It was methodical, calm, confident. The shower turned off. I closed the laptop with a sharp, instinctive motion and stepped away just as the bathroom door opened. He walked out, towel around his waist, steam trailing behind him. His eyes went immediately to the desk. Then to me. "Did you need something?" he asked. His voice was steady, curious even, not accusatory. "No," I said. My mouth felt numb. "I was just waiting." He nodded as if that made sense, as if nothing had happened. He dressed without speaking, his movements unhurried. When he passed me, his shoulder brushed mine lightly. The contact made me flinch before I could stop myself. He noticed. For the first time, his expression changed. Not anger. Not confusion. Assessment. After that, the apartment felt smaller. Corners seemed closer. Doors heavier. I began to imagine how sound traveled through walls, how much could be heard from the hallway, from neighboring apartments. I caught myself rehearsing explanations in my head, for neighbors, for friends, for the police. I didn't know why. I just knew my mind was preparing. Maxime started watching me the way I had been watching him. He asked where I was going, when I'd be back, whether I had plans. The questions were gentle, almost caring, but they came too often, and his eyes lingered on my answers as if measuring them. I stopped mentioning spontaneous errands. I became predictable, because predictability felt safer. One evening, he cooked dinner and set the table carefully, lighting a candle we hadn't used in years. The gesture should have felt romantic. Instead, it filled me with a quiet dread. He talked more than usual, about nothing important, his tone warm and controlled. He poured wine, but didn't drink much himself. At one point, he reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was warm. "Dry. You've been distant," he said softly. The room felt too still. I became acutely aware of the knife resting near his plate, of the way the candle flame moved slightly each time one of us breathed. "I've just been tired," I said. He studied my face for a long moment, then smiled. "Everything is fine," he said. "You know that, right?" I nodded. But my body didn't believe him. That night, lying in bed beside him, I realized something with sudden, brutal clarity. Whatever Maxim was involved in was no longer confined to the internet. And whatever he was preparing for, he had started accounting for me. The critical incident. The moment everything crossed from suspicion into certainty was quiet. There was no explosion of truth, no dramatic confrontation. Just a small, irreversible shift that made it impossible to pretend anymore. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The city was unusually still, the kind of stillness that comes from people staying indoors, from streets emptied by routine rather than fear. The light outside was flat and colorless. Maxim said he needed to step out for a while. He didn't say where. He didn't take his laptop, only his phone and his jacket. I watched him put on his shoes. He paused in the hallway, looked at me, and smiled. The smile lingered a fraction longer than usual. "I won't be long," he said. The door closed behind him with a soft, final sound. I stood there for several seconds after he left, listening to the silence settle back into the apartment. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my neck. I didn't plan to do anything. I told myself that clearly. I wasn't going to search. I wasn't going to dig. I was just going to sit and wait. Instead, I walked to his bag. It was on the chair by the desk where he usually left it. I touched it lightly at first, as if it might react. The fabric felt ordinary. Too ordinary. I opened the main compartment. Inside were things I recognized: charger, wallet, keys. And beneath them, the black notebook. The one I had seen before. I took it out and held it in my hands. It was heavier than I expected. The cover was plain, no markings, no label. The edges were worn, corners bent slightly inward. This was not a notebook that traveled back and forth to work and home. This was something that had been used repeatedly, deliberately. I sat at the table before opening it, as if posture mattered, as if I needed to prepare my body. The first pages were notes. Dense, neat handwriting. Dates in the margins. References to texts I didn't recognize. Words circled, underlined, connected by arrows. Some were in English, some not. There were symbols too. Simple shapes, repeated again and again, drawn with careful consistency. I turned the pages slowly. Further in, the notes became more specific. Times. Locations described indirectly, through landmarks rather than addresses. Observations written in neutral language. No emotion. No doubt. Just documentation. My mouth went dry. There were names. Not full names. Initials. Descriptions. Subject, written repeatedly. Followed by characteristics. Schedules. Patterns of movement. Notes about isolation. About vulnerability. I realized I was holding my breath when I reached a page where the writing changed slightly. Still controlled, but more compressed, as if written quickly. At the top of the page was a date. It was today's date. Below it, a single word was written and underlined twice. Ready. A sound came from the hallway. The lock turning. I didn't think. I closed the notebook and shoved it back into the bag just as the door opened. My hands were shaking violently now. I moved away from the chair, trying to slow my breathing, trying to rearrange my face into something neutral. Maxim stepped inside. He looked at me for a moment longer than usual. "You're pale," he said. "Are you feeling okay?" "Yes," I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "Just a headache." He nodded, watching me closely, then took off his jacket. As he did, something slid from the pocket and hit the floor with a soft metallic sound. A small object. Circular. Dark. He froze. So did I. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he bent down and picked it up quickly, closing his fingers around it before I could see it clearly. But I had already seen enough. It was a ring. Not jewelry. Something utilitarian. Heavy. Etched with the same symbol I had seen repeated in the notebook. Our eyes met. Something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not anger, but resignation. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," he said quietly. The word yet echoed in my head. I stepped back. He didn't move toward me. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, blocking the path to the door without appearing to do so deliberately. "It's not what you think," he said. I laughed once, a short, broken sound that surprised both of us. "I don't know what to think," I said, "but I know I'm scared." He tilted his head slightly, studying me, the way he studied screens, the way he studied problems. "That makes sense," he said. "Fear is part of alignment." I felt cold spread through my chest. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. He took a step forward. "Just one. I never meant for you to be involved," he said. "But you're very perceptive. That complicates things." I moved again, this time more urgently, my back hitting the kitchen counter. My hand searched blindly for something solid behind me. "You need to leave," I said. "Right now." He shook his head slowly. "That wouldn't be wise." For a moment, the world narrowed to details. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint traffic outside, the smell of soap on his skin. Ordinary things layered over something deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. The sound broke whatever hold the moment had. I pulled it out without looking and said the first thing that came into my head. "My sister's coming over," I said. "She's already on her way." It was a lie, but he didn't know that. He hesitated. I saw calculation flash across his face. Possibilities rearranging. Risk assessment. After a long moment, he stepped aside. "Fine," he said. "We'll talk later." I didn't answer. I walked past him, out of the apartment, my legs barely holding me up. I didn't stop until I reached the street. Only then did I start shaking uncontrollably. I never went back alone. Aftermath. I spent the first night on my sister's couch with all the lights on. Not because I thought light could stop anything, but because darkness felt like consent. My body kept waiting for the sound of keys in a lock that wasn't mine, for a knock that would arrive too early or too late, for the soft, careful way Maxime moved through rooms. Every time the building creaked, my muscles snapped tight. I didn't eat. I drank water in small sips and still felt dry, like fear had absorbed every bit of moisture from me. My sister Anya tried to get the story out of me, but the words came in the wrong order. I told her about the forum first, then the notebook, then the way he said yet, and when I heard myself repeat that word, my stomach rolled. I kept expecting her to interrupt and tell me I was overreacting. Instead, her face went blank and focused, the way it did when she handled emergencies at work. She didn't ask if I was sure. She asked what time he left, what time he returned, whether he had followed me. Practical questions. The kind that make you understand this is real. In the morning, we went back to my apartment together. We didn't call ahead. I didn't want him to have time to reset the environment again. We stood outside the door for a long minute before I could raise my hand to the buzzer. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. No one answered. When we unlocked the door and stepped inside, the air smelled wrong. Not decay, not anything dramatic. Just stale, like a room that has been closed too long. The kitchen looked normal. The candle from the night before was gone. The table was wiped clean. The chair where his bag had been was empty. I walked through the apartment slowly, one room at a time, as if I was searching for evidence of my own memory. Everything was where it belonged, which somehow felt like another kind of threat. A deliberate resetting. The bed was made. The laundry was folded. The surfaces were bare. His laptop was gone. So was the notebook. I stood in front of the closet where he kept his jackets and felt my vision narrow. My hands went cold. Anya asked if anything was missing besides the computer and the notebook. I opened drawers and looked, not because I expected to find anything, but because my mind needed action. The only obvious absence was a small metal box I'd never paid attention to before, tucked in the back of his desk drawer. I remembered seeing it once, thinking it held cables or spare keys. The drawer was empty now except for a few paper clips arranged in a straight line. Anya told me to pack. I moved through the bedroom like I was underwater. I grabbed a suitcase and started putting in clothes without folding them. Every time a zipper rasped or a hanger clicked, my skin prickled. I kept waiting for him to appear in the doorway, calm and steady, and tell me to stop. He didn't. The silence of the apartment felt temporary, like a pause between breaths. We left within an hour. From my sister's place, we called the police. I tried to explain without sounding hysterical. "I found notes," I said. He's active on forums about ritual murders. He said things that made me think I'm not safe. I could hear my voice shake. The dispatcher's questions were polite and methodical. Did he threaten you directly? Did he hurt you? Do you have evidence? I said no to the first two and yes to the third, but evidence was already slipping away, because what I'd seen had been removed. When an officer met us later that day, he listened without showing much. He took notes. He asked if I had access to my husband's devices, if I could provide screenshots, if I had saved anything. I felt sick. I had done the opposite of saving. I had closed the laptop, put the notebook back, tried to behave as if nothing happened because I thought that would keep me safe in the moment. It had kept me alive, maybe, but it had left me with almost nothing concrete. Anya asked about a protective order. The officer explained the process, the documentation needed, the threshold of threats. I heard the words, but they didn't land. My mind kept replaying Maxim's calm tone, the way he said, "That wouldn't be wise." Not a threat, not technically. Just a statement of control. That evening, Anya drove me to a clinic because I hadn't slept and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and tired bodies. The fluorescent lights made everything look flat and unreal. The doctor asked if I felt in danger. I said yes. The word came out too easily, as if it had been waiting. They gave me something mild to help me sleep, but sleep didn't come cleanly. I kept waking to the sensation of someone standing near the couch, watching. Each time there was nothing. 2 days passed with no contact. Then Maxim sent a message. It wasn't angry. It wasn't pleading. It was gentle, almost affectionate. I don't want this to get messy. Let's talk. You're safe. You always were. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The words felt wrong in my body. Messy was what you said about divorce paperwork or moving furniture. Not about a notebook full of schedules and the word ready. I didn't respond. He sent another message that night. You're making decisions based on fear. Fear isn't a good guide. The phrase made my throat tighten because it echoed what he'd said at the table about alignment. It sounded like something he'd written online, polished and controlled. My hands began to sweat. I turned my phone off. The next morning, Anya and I drove to the courthouse to start the process for a temporary protective order. I sat on a hard bench with other women, other men, other stories I didn't know. The air smelled like paper and cold coffee. I kept my eyes down. In my purse, I carried my keys like a weapon, even though I knew they weren't one. In the office window, the clerk asked if I had proof of a threat. I told her about the notebook, about the forum, about the ring. I heard myself speak and felt the story turn thin in the open air. But then Anya slid her phone across the counter. She had gone back to the apartment after we left and taken photos of the desk drawer, the missing box, the empty space where the laptop had been. Not proof of intent, but proof of sudden removal. Proof that something had existed and was now gone. The clerk nodded, expression unchanged. Paperwork moved forward. While we waited, I changed everything I could change. I transferred my salary into a new account. I froze my credit. I created new passwords on a computer that wasn't mine. I turned on two-factor authentication for everything, the way people do after their identity has already been stolen. Each step felt too late, but doing nothing felt like letting him keep the keys to my life. My friend Mara, who worked in cybersecurity, offered to help. She met us in a cafe and listened while I described the forum page I'd seen. The layout, the thread structure, the tone. She didn't smirk. She didn't dramatize it. She asked what platform it looked like, whether there were private messages, whether Maxime used the same username elsewhere. Then she opened her laptop and started searching. She found traces quickly, which terrified me because it meant the trail had never been hidden. It had only been hidden from me. Maxime's username, an alphanumeric handle that looked meaningless, appeared on multiple boards, some public, some locked behind registration walls. Mara couldn't access everything, but she could see cached snippets and cross posts. The language was consistent, clinical, reverent, obsessed with conditions, with cleanliness, with timing. Not the messy, emotional language of thrill seekers, but the tone of someone treating ideas as procedures. There were also threads about real cases. unsolved murders, bodies found in places that didn't make sense. People speculated in a detached way. They didn't celebrate openly, they analyzed. That was the part that made my skin crawl. It wasn't sensational. It was quiet and patient. Mara told me to stop reading. She said it would poison my sleep. She was right. Even the fragments I'd already seen sat behind my eyes like after-images. We gave the officer Mara's findings. He said he would file it, that it could support the protective order, but that online activity alone was complicated without direct threats or a specific plan tied to me. I nodded as if I understood. Inside, I felt the familiar helplessness return. The system wanted a clean line from threat to action. What I had was a man who moved in shadows and spoke in calm half-truths. The protective order was granted temporarily, with a hearing set for later. Maxim was legally required not to contact me. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like placing tape over a door you know can be opened from the other side. Because the day after the order was served, someone started watching my sister's building. Not standing openly, not threatening. Just a car that appeared on the street at odd hours, parked a little too long, then left. A dark sedan. The first time I saw it, my mouth went numb. I told myself it could be anyone. The second time, I recognized the dent near the rear light. Maxim's car had that dent. Anya called the police. They said they couldn't do much without clear evidence of a violation beyond presence on a public street. They advised us to document. We started taking photos, writing down times. We lived in a new routine built around fear and record-keeping. Maxim did not message me again, but he began contacting people around me. My mother called, confused, saying Maxim had asked if she'd heard from me and that he sounded worried. My coworker said he had emailed, asking whether I was okay. Each contact was framed as concern, as if he were the injured party. I realized with a sinking clarity that he was building a narrative. A version of events where I was unstable, frightened by harmless interests, spiraling into paranoia. It was a neat defense. It also isolated me, because every time I tried to explain, I sounded less believable. The hearing came. Maxim arrived in a clean shirt, hair neatly combed, hands steady. He looked exactly like the man I had married. That was the most frightening part. In the courtroom air, he seemed smaller than the fear he had become in my mind, and for a moment, I hated myself for being afraid. Then his eyes met mine and the assessment returned, quiet and cold, and my body remembered. He spoke softly. He said I had misunderstood. He said he read dark material out of intellectual interest, that he was fascinated by belief systems and crime history, that forums were just discussion spaces. He said the notebook was for personal research notes. He didn't mention Reddy. He didn't mention the ring. He didn't need to. He let reason do the work. When it was my turn, my hands trembled so badly I had to grip the edge of the table. I described the notebook, the scheduling language, the way he reacted when he thought I'd seen it. The phrase, "fear is part of alignment." I watched the judge's face for signs of understanding. I saw caution. I saw the discomfort of deciding between stories when one of them can't be proven cleanly. The order was extended but narrowed. No direct contact, no approaching my workplace, no approaching my sister's home. The judge warned Maxim that violations would have consequences. Maxim nodded, calm, almost respectful. As we left, he didn't look at me again. For a few weeks after, the car stopped appearing. I let my shoulders drop slightly. I began to think in small, fragile ways that maybe distance and paperwork had worked. That maybe he had moved on to whatever world he lived in online and would leave me out of it. Then I received a package. No return address. Plain brown paper. My name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. It sat on my sister's kitchen table like a dead animal. My hands went numb. Anya told me not to touch it. She called the police. Inside, there was only one thing. A photocopy of a forum post. No gore. No explicit description. Just Maxim's words, printed cleanly, and a symbol at the top that matched the ring, the notebook. The post was about witnesses, about how perception creates complication, about how silence is a condition. At the bottom, someone had underlined one sentence in pen. You can't unsee what you've aligned yourself to. That night I didn't sleep at all. I sat upright, back against the wall, listening to the building, listening to my own breathing. The fear wasn't screaming fear. It was a slow, deep certainty that I was still inside his world, even from a different address. In the months that followed, I did what people do when they are trying to survive something that cannot be neatly explained. I moved. I changed my number. I changed my email. I told my workplace's security desk. I warned friends in careful, limited language. I learned routes and exits. I stopped posting online. I stopped sharing my location casually. I became smaller. The last time I saw Maxime was not dramatic. It was in a grocery store parking lot, late afternoon, bright sunlight. I was walking to my car with a bag of oranges when I felt that old sensation, the shift in the air, the awareness of being watched. I turned and saw him standing near the cart return, hands in his pockets, as if he had been there the whole time. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, calm and steady, and then he smiled. It was the same correct smile that didn't reach his eyes. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys once. When I looked up again, he was gone. I reported it. Nothing came of it. A man in a parking lot isn't a crime. A smile isn't a threat. A forum post photocopy is hard to trace. But since then, I've lived with a rule I never used to need. If someone can build a secret life in plain sight, they can carry it anywhere. And if they decide you've seen too much, the danger isn't always in what they do. Sometimes it's in how patiently they wait. After the package, the officer assigned to my report finally stopped treating it like a domestic misunderstanding. He still couldn't promise anything, but his questions changed. He asked whether Maxime had access to printers, whether he had friends who could do favors, whether there were cameras in my sister's building. We pulled footage from the hallway. It showed nothing useful, just a delivery person in a cap, face turned away at the right moment, hands gloved. Ordinary concealment. Professional in its simplicity. Mara helped me harden what remained of my digital life. She explained, gently, that someone who lived online the way Maxim seemed to could exploit 1,000 small openings, old passwords reused, data leaks, social engineering. We went through my accounts one by one. She found logins from unfamiliar locations on an old email I hadn't used in years. Nothing definitive, but enough to make my blood run cold. I realized he might have been watching me for longer than I understood. Not in the romantic sense people tell stories about. In the practical sense. Tracking. Learning. Mapping. I filed for divorce. Even that felt dangerous because paperwork creates addresses, schedules, predictable days. My lawyer advised me to use a PO, box, and to keep my location off public documents where possible. I signed forms with a hand that wouldn't steady. Each signature felt like writing my name on a target. Maxime didn't contest at first. He responded through his lawyer with polite, minimal communication. The calmness scared me more than anger would have. It suggested strategy. It suggested patience. It suggested he believed time was on his side. During the divorce process, a private investigator hired by my lawyer looked into Maxime's background. Nothing criminal came up. No arrests. No reports. No obvious history. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made the forums feel even more significant, because it meant whatever he was involved in lived in the spaces where records don't form easily. Private rooms, encrypted chats, anonymous boards, conversations that vanish. The investigator did find one odd detail. Maxime had attended several meetups over the past year, listed under vague event names, discussion groups, lectures, workshops. The locations shifted. Rented community rooms, back rooms of cafes, private offices after hours. Nothing illegal on paper. But the pattern was there. Regular attendance, consistent timing, the same handful of participants recurring across different events. A network. When I heard that, I felt the same sinking pressure behind my eyes that I'd felt the day I saw the forum header. Not proof, but shape. I started therapy because my body stopped listening to reason. I jumped at the sound of keys. I scanned every car that slowed near me. I stopped trusting closed doors. The therapist called it hypervigilance, a normal response to prolonged fear. She taught me grounding exercises. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch. I did them obediently. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they didn't, because the problem wasn't in my imagination. The problem was that I had seen enough to know my fear had a source. There was one night, months later, when I thought it had ended. I had moved into a small apartment under my own name, but in a different neighborhood. I had new locks, a security camera, a routine built around caution. I came home from work and found my hallway light already on. I stood outside my door, keys in my hand, staring at that thin strip of light under the frame. My stomach hollowed. I listened. Nothing. I called Anya. I called the police. When they arrived and we went in together, the apartment was empty. The light switch was in the on position. I was certain I had turned it off that morning. The officer checked the door. No signs of forced entry. The camera footage showed a gap, 3 minutes of static, then it resumed. The technician later said it could be a glitch. I knew what my body believed. On the kitchen counter, perfectly centered, was a clean white envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, blank except for the symbol in the corner, printed small, like a watermark. No message. No threat. Just presence. I reported it. The report joined the others. Paper stacked against something that didn't care about paper. After that, I stopped trying to win with certainty. I started trying to survive with probability. I made choices that reduced risk even when they felt irrational. I moved again, this time farther. I changed jobs. I cut my social circle down to people who didn't post about me, who didn't tag locations, who understood why I needed them to be careful without asking for a story that would satisfy their curiosity. The divorce finalized quietly. I kept expecting a last dramatic act. Nothing came. No outburst. No confrontation. Just silence, which I learned to treat not as safety, but as a phase. I still don't know what Maxime planned, or whether he ever moved from discussion to action. I only know the shape of his attention, the way it felt to be measured and accounted for. I know what it does to a person to realize that the one closest to you can live a second life in plain sight. I know the specific chill of finding your name adjacent to someone else's preparations. People sometimes ask, years later, why I didn't prove it, why I didn't take screenshots, why I didn't grab the notebook and run. They say it the way people say things when they believe danger is always obvious and loud. But the truth is that the most frightening part was how normal he looked while it happened. How clean the apartment was. How gentle his voice sounded. How easy it was for the world to accept him and question me. And that's what still keeps me awake on certain nights, even now. Not the idea of a ritual. Not the forums. Not the symbol. The idea of a man who can smile and say, "You're safe," while deciding when safety ends. I keep one habit that I never talk about in public. Whenever I move into a new place, I sit on the floor on the first night and listen to the building the way you listen to a stranger's breathing. Pipes, radiators, elevators, distant voices. I learn the normal sounds until they settle into my nervous system. Then, if something changes, a step that doesn't fit, a pause that lasts too long, I notice immediately. Maybe that makes me sound paranoid. Maybe I am. But paranoia is sometimes just a name people give to pattern recognition when it makes them uncomfortable. I never found that notebook again. I never saw the ring up close. I never got the clear proof that would make a story like this easier for other people to accept. What I got instead were small confirmations. A photo of his car near my sister's building, a photocopy with a sentence underlined, a camera glitch at the exact wrong moment, an envelope with a symbol in the corner. Pieces. Enough to keep my body from forgetting. Every year around the same time, late autumn, when the air smells of wet leaves and metal, I get an email in my spam folder from an address that looks randomly generated. The subject line is always blank. The message body is always empty. But attached is a single image file, a black circle intersected by thin lines, the same careful mark I saw in his notes. I have never opened the attachment. I delete it. I empty the trash. I pretend that deletion is an ending. But I know what it really is. It's permission for him to remain undefined. And some nights, when the city outside my window goes quiet and my apartment holds its breath, I wonder whether that is the point. Not to harm me. Not yet. Just to keep me in the state he named so calmly at our table. Alignment. A life shaped by fear, even at a distance. The last practical thing I did was the hardest. I stopped trying to convince anyone. I stopped telling the full story at dinner tables or in offices or to new friends who asked why I lived the way I lived. I learned how to compress it into a sentence that sounded acceptable. My ex was involved with dangerous people online. That sentence never carried the weight, but it kept me from being argued with. And in the quiet that followed, I began to understand something I had refused to admit at the beginning. The internet didn't create what was inside Maxim. It just gave it a place to grow without daylight. I don't know where he is now. I don't check. I don't search his name. I don't look for the symbol. Because the few times I tried, I found new threads, new users repeating familiar phrases, the same calm obsession with conditions. It was like finding his fingerprints on glass you hadn't touched. So I live in a narrower world, by choice. I lock my doors. I keep my curtains closed at night. I keep my life small enough that it's hard to map. And I hold on to one ugly truth. Sometimes you escape a person, but you don't escape their attention. You only learn how to carry it. If you're reading this as entertainment, I understand. I used to think the same way about stories that sounded too controlled to be real. But I'm writing it because I needed someone, somewhere, to know that it happened exactly in the way quiet things happen. Without blood, without shouting, without a clear moment where you can say, here is the villain. Just a gradual rearrangement of your life around someone else's secret.